The dust rose in lazy spirals beneath the hooves of Colt Mercer's bay mare as he navigated the rutted wagon trail through Wyoming territory. The late afternoon sun of August 1889 cast long shadows across the sagebrush-dotted landscape, painting the world in shades of amber and rust. He'd been riding for 3 days straight from Cheyenne, his saddlebags light on supplies but heavy with the weight of memories he couldn't outrun. Colt adjusted his weathered Stetson against the glare, his gray eyes scanning the horizon with the practiced wariness of a man who'd learned to read danger in the smallest details. At 32, he carried himself with the loose-limbed grace of someone comfortable in the saddle, though the slight favor he showed his left shoulder spoke of old wounds that ached when storms rolled in. He'd planned to push through to the next settlement before nightfall, but the sight ahead made him rein in his horse. A covered wagon sat askew beside the trail. One wheel canted at an odd angle. No oxen, no horses, just the wagon itself, looking as forlorn as a ship run aground in a sea of dust and sage. "Easy, Belle," he murmured to his mare, who snorted nervously at the stillness. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt .45 at his hip, a habit born of too many ambushes to count. As he approached, a figure emerged from behind the wagon, a woman, her emerald traveling dress incongruous against the harsh landscape, stood with her spine straight as a rifle barrel. Auburn hair, escaped from what must have been an elaborate arrangement, caught fire in the dying light. She held a derringer in one small hand, aimed steady despite the tremor he could see in her jaw. "That's close enough, Mr." Her voice carried the cultured tones of the East, though strain roughened its edges. "State your business or move along." Colt raised his hand slowly, showing empty palms. "No harm meant, ma'am. Saw the wagon. Thought someone might need help." She studied him with eyes the color of spring violets, taking in his trail-worn clothes, the tied-down holster, the weather-beaten face that had seen too much. Whatever she saw made her lower the derringer slightly, though she didn't put it away. "Help," she repeated, and a bitter laugh escaped her. "Unless you can conjure a team of horses from thin air or turn back time, I doubt you can offer the kind of help I need." Colt dismounted slowly, keeping his movements easy and unthreatening. Up close, he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks, though she'd clearly tried to wipe them away. Her dress, while dusty, was well-made silk, if he wasn't mistaken. Everything about her spoke of money and breeding. Everything except the steel in her spine and the way she held that little gun like she knew how to use it. "Name's Colt Mercer," he offered. "Mind telling me what happened here?" She hesitated, then seemed to decide she had nothing left to lose. "Rosalind Carter, of Philadelphia. Former of Philadelphia, I suppose." The derringer finally lowered completely. "I was to meet my intended at the Sutton Ranch. We'd corresponded for months. He sent money for passage. Promised." Her voice caught. "Promised many things. As it turns out, all lies." Colt noticed the torn envelope near the wagon wheel, the scattered pages of a letter dancing in the breeze. He didn't need to read them to understand. He'd seen this story before. Eastern women lured west by promises of marriage and prosperity, only to find themselves abandoned or worse. He'd take the horses. "This morning. Said he'd made other arrangements, more profitable arrangements. Apparently." She gestured to the broken wheel. "Even if I could fix this, where would I go? I spent everything I had getting here." The sun dipped lower, painting her face in shades of gold and shadow. Despite her dire circumstances, she hadn't dissolved into hysterics. That took grit, the kind that might survive out here if given half a chance. "You got any people back east?" "Dead, all of them. That's why I—" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter now." Colt looked around at the emptiness stretching in every direction. Come nightfall, this would be no place for anyone alone, especially a woman. Coyotes were the least of the dangers that prowled these parts after dark. "I've got a place about 10 miles north," he heard himself saying, though part of him wondered at his own foolishness. Nothing fancy, just a cabin and some outbuildings. I'm running cattle for the Box J outfit through the winter. You could— I won't be any man's kept woman, she interrupted, fire flashing in those violet eyes. I may be desperate, Mr. Mercer, but I'm not that desperate. Didn't say you would be. He kept his voice level, though he admired her spirit. Place has a separate bunkhouse. You could have the cabin. Work for your keep. If that sits better with you, can you cook? I can learn. Can you handle ranch work? I can learn that too. He almost smiled at her determination. It's hard living out here. Nothing like Philadelphia. Philadelphia didn't want me any more than my so-called fiancé did. She lifted her chin. I'll take hard living over no living at all. Colt considered his options. Smart thing would be to give her some supplies and directions to town. Let her become someone else's problem. But something in her eyes not pleading, just steady and determined, made him think of his sister Sarah. Dead these 5 years from fever. Sarah would have horsewhipped him for even thinking of leaving a woman stranded. Get what you need from the wagon, he decided. We'll have to ride double. Come back tomorrow with a buckboard for the rest. Rosalind's composure finally cracked a little. You'd do that for a stranger. Wouldn't be right, leaving you here. He turned to check Belle's saddle, uncomfortable with the gratitude in her eyes. Besides, winter's coming. Could use an extra pair of hands around the place. She moved to gather her things, and he noticed the way she walked careful, like someone testing unfamiliar ground. Everything about her marked her as out of place, from the delicate boots pecking beneath her hem to the cameo at her throat. The West would either break her or remake her. He'd seen it go both ways. Mr. Mercer. She paused by the wagon. What kind of man takes in a stranger with no questions about her past? The kind who has his own past he'd rather not discuss, he replied honestly. We all came west for a reason. Miss Carter, some of us are running to something. Some of us are running from it. Which are you? He didn't answer, but she nodded as if he had. They worked in silence to gather her essentials: a carpet bag, a small trunk, a wooden box she clutched like it held precious secrets. The torn letter still lay in the dust, and she gave it one long look before turning away. His name was William Thornton, she said quietly, as Colt secured her trunk behind his saddle. In his letters, he seemed kind, lonely, like me. He wrote about building something together, about needing a true partner. Her laugh held edges sharp enough to cut. I suppose he found a partner with a better dowry. Man who'd abandon a woman in the wilderness isn't worth the salt in your tears, Colt said bluntly. You're better off. Better off. She tested the words. Yes, I suppose I am, though it's hard to see how at the moment. Colt mounted Belle first, then reached down to help Rosalind up behind him. She hesitated only a moment before accepting his hand, settling awkwardly on the horse's rump with her arms tentatively around his waist. Never ridden like this before. I've never done many things before, she admitted. But as I said, I can learn. They set off as the sun touched the horizon, Belle picking her way carefully with the extra weight. Colt felt acutely aware of the woman behind him, the light pressure of her hands, the way she tensed at every unexpected movement of the horse. She smelled of lavender and dust, an oddly compelling combination. Tell me about this ranch, she said after they'd ridden in silence for a while. Not much to tell. Cabin, barn, couple of corrals. Previous owner abandoned it 2 years back. I'm watching cattle for Jim Jameson. He owns the Box J spread east of here. Come spring, I'll move on. You always move on. Always have. Must be lonely. He shrugged. Lonely's not the worst thing a man can be. She fell quiet after that. And they rode through the gathering dusk with only the creak of leather and the steady rhythm of Belle's hooves for company. The first stars appeared, diamond bright in the clear sky. Somewhere in the distance, A coyote called, answered by another. Rosalind's arms tightened slightly. Are those coyotes? They won't bother us. And if they did? He patted the rifle in its saddle scabbard. Then they'd regret it. The simple confidence in his voice seemed to reassure her. She relaxed marginally, though he could still feel the tension humming through her like a plucked wire. The cabin appeared as a dark shape against the star-silvered landscape, small but sturdy. Colt had spent weeks repairing the roof and chinking the walls. It wasn't much, but it would keep the weather out. Home sweet home, he said, trying for lightness, such as it is. He helped her down, noting the way she swayed slightly on solid ground. Ranch life would toughen her up quick, or she'd be on the next stage back east. He wondered which it would be. Thank you, she said simply as he lit a lantern. The warm light revealed a single room with a pot-bellied stove, rough table, and narrow bed in the corner. For all of this, I know you didn't have to. Like I said, wouldn't be right. He set her carpetbag by the door. I'll bunk in the barn tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out something more permanent. I'm putting you out of your own home. You're giving me a chance to remember what civilized company feels like, he countered. Fair trade, I'd say. She studied him in the lamplight, and he wondered what she saw. Just another saddle tramp, probably, a man with sun-weathered skin and calloused hands, carrying ghosts in his eyes. Nothing like the Eastern gentleman she was used to. You're not what I expected to find out here, she said finally. What did you expect? Honestly, after today, I'm not sure I expected kindness. The simple statement hit him somewhere unexpected. He cleared his throat. There's beans and biscuits in the larder. Coffee if you want it. I'll see to the horse. He turned to go, but her voice stopped him. Mr. Mercer, do you believe in second chances? Colt paused in the doorway, looking back at the woman who'd appeared in his life like a dust devil, unsettling everything. I reckon if we didn't, there wouldn't be much point in getting up each morning. Her smile was small but genuine, the first he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, hinting at the woman she might have been before disappointment carved its lines. Then perhaps we both came to the right place after all. As Colt led Belle to the barn, he wondered what he'd gotten himself into. A proper lady from Philadelphia and a used-up gun hand trying to forget his past. It sounded like the beginning of a bad joke. But something in the way she'd stood there by that broken wagon, refusing to cry, refusing to give up, had stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. Not attraction. Exactly. Though she was pretty enough to make a man notice. It was more the recognition of a kindred spirit, someone else who'd been broken but refused to lie down and die. The night wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Change was coming. He could feel it in his bones. Whether for good or ill remained to be seen. In the cabin behind him, lamplight glowed warm through the single window. For the first time in longer than he cared to remember, Colt Mercer's temporary home didn't feel quite so temporary, or quite so much like just another stop on the way to nowhere. The morning sun crept through the cabin's single window, painting golden rectangles across the rough plank floor. Rosalind woke disoriented, her body stiff from sleeping on the narrow bed with its thin straw mattress. For a moment, she couldn't place the unfamiliar sounds, the lowing of cattle, the nickering of horses, the creak of the windmill drawing water. Then memory flooded back. Wyoming, the abandoned wagon, Colt Mercer's weathered face in the lamplight. She rose and dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with buttons meant for a lady's maid. The emerald traveling dress was wholly impractical for ranch life, but it was all she had until they retrieved her trunk. Through the window, she spotted Colt by the corral, his movements economical as he worked with a young horse. He'd been up for hours, judging by the smoke already rising from the outdoor cooking fire. Steeling herself, Rosalind stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying scents utterly foreign to her Philadelphia upbringing: sage, dust, and something wild she couldn't name. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, making her feel small and exposed. "Morning," Colt called without turning around. "Coffee's on the fire. Help yourself." She found the battered pot and poured a cup, nearly choking on the first sip. It was strong enough to float a horseshoe. Nothing like the delicate brew she was accustomed to. Too strong, he'd materialized beside her, silent as a ghost despite his spurs. "I'll adjust," she managed, taking another determined sip. His lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "There's a lot to adjust to out here. Question is whether you're willing to do the adjusting. I told you yesterday I can learn." He studied her with those gray eyes that seemed to see too much. "Learning and doing are two different things. Can you milk a cow? No. Gather eggs? No. Start a fire, haul water, mend a fence? No, no, and no." She lifted her chin. "But unless you plan to quiz me all morning, perhaps you could start teaching instead of testing." This time he did smile, just slightly. "Fair enough. Let's start with breakfast. A body can't work on an empty stomach." He led her to a rough outdoor kitchen set up, a fire ring, a wooden prep table, and shelves protected by an overhanging roof. Everything was basic but clean, organized with military precision. "Bacon's in the cold box, beans in the pot, biscuits—" He paused. "Can you make biscuits?" "I watched our cook make them." At his expression, she added defensively, "I said I could learn, not that I already knew everything. Watching and doing are two different things. Yes, you mentioned that." He showed her how to work with the heavy cast iron skillets, how to judge the fire's heat, how to mix biscuit dough with the supplies on hand. Her first attempt produced flat, hard discs that could have served as wagon wheels. "Well," Colt said diplomatically, "the chickens won't go hungry." By the third batch, she'd produced something resembling actual biscuits. They sat at the rough table outside, eating in companionable silence. The food was simple but filling, and Rosalind found herself oddly proud of her contribution, meager as it was. "After breakfast, we'll go back for your things." Colt said, "Then you'll need proper clothes. Can't work in silk and petticoats." Heat rose to her cheeks. "I have some plainer things in my trunk." "Plain for Philadelphia isn't plain for Wyoming." He gestured to his own worn dungarees and cotton shirt. "There's a trunk of clothes in the barn. Belonged to the previous owner's wife. She was about your size." The idea of wearing another woman's clothes, a stranger's clothes, would have horrified her weeks ago. Now it seemed practical, even generous. "What happened to them, the previous owners?" Colt's expression closed off. "Fever took her. He couldn't stand to stay after that." The simple tragedy of it struck her. How many stories like that did this harsh land hold? They retrieved her belongings without incident, the abandoned wagon looking even more forlorn in the bright morning light. Colt had brought tools and managed to patch the wheel enough to pull it back to the ranch. Among her things, Rosalind found her mother's china tea set, miraculously unbroken, and her father's book's luxuries that seemed absurd out here, but which she couldn't bear to leave. "Books," Colt noted, hefting the box. "Haven't seen many of those in a while." "Do you read?" "When I get the chance. Winter evenings get long." It was the most personal thing he'd volunteered about himself. That afternoon, dressed in a simple calico work dress that smelled of cedar and sadness, Rosalind had her first real ranch lesson. Colt started with the chickens, showing her how to scatter feed, gather eggs without getting pecked, and watch for signs of illness. "They're not pets," he warned when she began naming them. "Come winter, some will be dinner." The casual statement reminded her how far she was from her former life. The milk cow, a placid Jersey named Buttercup, proved more challenging. Rosalind's hands cramped, her back ached, and more milk ended up on her than in the pail. "You're fighting her," Colt observed. "Relax, find the rhythm." Easy for him to say. But gradually, she began to understand what he meant. There was a rhythm to it, a partnership between human and animal that required patience on both sides. Days fell into a pattern. Dawn came early, with chores that couldn't wait. Colt worked the horses and checked the cattle while Rosalind managed the household tasks, a grand term for keeping a one-room cabin and feeding 2 people. Evenings found them sharing simple meals, sometimes talking, sometimes sitting in comfortable silence while the coyotes sang in the distance. "You never asked," Rosalind said one evening, darning a sock by lamplight. "About before, about why I really came west." Colt looked up from the harness he was mending. "Figure that's your business." "My father was a doctor," she said anyway. "He believed in education for women, sent me to finishing school. But when he died last year, we discovered he'd been living beyond his means. Everything had to be sold. My aunt took me in, but—" She paused, choosing her words. She had very specific ideas about my future. Marriage to her business partner, a man older than my father. When I refused, she made it clear I was no longer welcome. "So you answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride." It seemed romantic at the time, a fresh start, building something together. Her laugh was rueful. "I suppose I've always been too fond of novels." "Nothing wrong with wanting something better." His voice was quiet. "We all do things we wouldn't normally when we're desperate." She wanted to ask what desperate thing he'd done, what had driven him to this isolated existence, but something in his expression warned her off. Instead, she said, "Tomorrow's Sunday. Is there a church nearby?" "About 20 miles to town, too far for regular visits." "Oh." She tried to hide her disappointment. Sunday services had been one constant in her life, a source of community and comfort. Colt must have seen something in her face. "There's a traveling preacher comes through every few weeks, and some of the neighboring ranches gather sometimes. Take turns reading scripture." "Neighboring ranches, I haven't seen another soul. Nearest neighbor is 8 miles north. The Hendersons. Good people. They'll be curious about you." The thought of meeting others both excited and terrified her. What would they think of her situation? An unmarried woman living with a bachelor, even with the careful arrangements they'd made. As if reading her thoughts, Colt said, "Might be best to let them think we're married. Tongues wag out here same as anywhere." The suggestion made sense, but it raised complicated feelings. "I won't lie." "Don't have to. Just don't correct their assumptions." He paused. "Unless you'd rather deal with the kind of attention a single woman gets out here." She thought of William Thornton's betrayal, of her vulnerability at that abandoned wagon. "No, you're right. It's more practical." "Practical," he repeated, and something flickered in his eyes before he returned to his work. That night, Rosalind lay awake thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she'd been preparing for marriage to a stranger. Now she was living with a different stranger, learning skills she'd never imagined needing. Her hands were rough, her skin was tanned despite her bonnet, and she'd never been more exhausted. She'd also never felt more alive. A sound outside made her tense footsteps on the porch, then Colt's voice, low and reassuring. "Just me, checking the stock." She heard him settle on the porch, the creak of wood as he likely sat in the single chair out there. After a moment's hesitation, she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and joined him. "Couldn't sleep." He had his harmonica out, but hadn't been playing. "Clear nights like this remind me of being on watch. Old habits." "You were in the military." "Cavalry, 7th Regiment." His voice was carefully neutral. "Long time ago." She knew better than to press. They sat in silence, watching stars wheel overhead. The night sky was impossibly vast, nothing like the small patch visible between Philadelphia buildings. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked finally. "Coming west. Can't regret something that kept you alive." He paused. "You. Ask me in a month." she said, surprising a soft laugh out of him. That's fair. He lifted the harmonica. Mind if I play Help Settle the Horses? Please. The melody that drifted out was unexpectedly sweet, a gentle waltz that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. Rosalind closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. For a moment, she could almost pretend they were somewhere else, somewhere softer. When he finished, she said, That was beautiful. What's it called? Lorena. Heard it during the war. Always stuck with me. There was a story there. She sensed, but like so many things about Colt Mercer, it remained locked away. I should go in, she said eventually. Dawn comes early. That it does. He stood when she did. An unexpected courtesy. Miss Carter Rosalind, you're doing well. Better than I expected. The praise warmed her more than it should have. I have a good teacher. In the lamplight spilling from the doorway, she caught something unguarded in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or something softer. Then it was gone, replaced by his usual careful neutrality. Good night, Colt. Good night. Inside, she heard him resume playing, the harmonica's voice carrying across the empty land like a prayer. She thought about all the adjustments she'd made, all the ones still to come, about the careful distance they maintained, necessary but somehow already chafing, about the way his rare smiles transformed his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Dangerous thoughts for a woman in her position. But as she drifted towards sleep, Rosalind couldn't quite bring herself to push them away. She'd come west for a new life. After all, perhaps she was finally beginning to build one, even if it looked nothing like what she'd imagined. The harmonica fell silent, and she heard Colt's footsteps heading to the barn. Two strangers, keeping careful boundaries, building something that might be partnership or might be merely survival. Time would tell which. For now, it was enough to have a roof overhead, work for her hands, and someone who looked at her and saw capability instead of just a burden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new small victories and defeats. She was beginning to think she might actually survive this after all. The wagon wheels groaned in protest as they rolled down the main street of Cedar Ridge, Wyoming territory. Rosalind sat beside Colt on the buckboard, acutely aware of every stare that followed their progress. After 3 weeks of isolation at the ranch, the small town felt overwhelming with its noise and bustle. Keep your eyes forward, Colt murmured. Don't give them more to talk about than they already have. She straightened her spine. Though the calico dress and practical bonnet made her feel like she was wearing a costume, how different from the elegant ensemble she'd worn on that first journey west, full of hope and delusions. They pulled up outside Morrison's general store, and Colt helped her down with the same careful courtesy he always showed, close enough to be proper, distant enough to maintain boundaries. Morning, Mercer, called a man from the store's porch. Heard you had company out at your place. Morning, Tom. Colt's voice was even. This is Mrs. Mercer, Rosalind. Tom Morrison runs the store. The lie rolled off his tongue so easily that Rosalind barely had time to school her features. Mrs. Mercer. They'd discussed it, but hearing it spoken aloud made her stomach flutter with unnamed emotions. Tom Morrison tipped his hat, curiosity bright in his eyes. Ma'am, pleasure to meet you. Folks been wondering when Colt would finally settle down. The pleasure is mine, Rosalind managed, falling back on ingrained social graces. Inside the store, she focused on their list while Colt handled the heavier supplies. The familiar scents of coffee, leather, and lamp oil grounded her as she selected flour, salt, and other necessities. She was comparing fabrics they needed new curtains for the cabin's window when she heard the voices. Mail order bride, from what I heard, abandoned out on the trail like damaged goods. Can you imagine, though I suppose beggars can't be choosers? And Colt Mercer's hardly what you'd call a catch, with that reputation of his. Rosalind's hands stilled on the bolt of blue calico. The women speaking stood one aisle over, their voices carrying clearly. Did you see her dress Eastern fashion, but mended, and those hands already showing rough work? How the mighty have fallen. Still, she's pretty enough. Probably why he took her in. Men always were fools for a pretty face and a sad story. Heat flooded Rosalind's cheeks, but before she could move, a third voice cut through sharp as winter wind. Ladies, I believe you're discussing my wife. Colt stood at the end of the aisle, his expression carved from stone. The two gossips, Mrs. Bartlett and Mrs. Henley, prominent town matrons, had the grace to look embarrassed. Mr. Mercer, we didn't... That is, we were just spreading poison, as usual. His voice remained level, but something in his stance made both women step back. My wife has more courage in her little finger than most folks have in their whole body. She doesn't need your pity or your judgment. He moved to Rosalind's side, his hand settling gently on her elbow. Find what you needed. Yes. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Good. Tom's loading the wagon. He steered her toward the door, pausing only to tip his hat mockingly to the gossips. Ladies. Outside, Rosalind drew a shaky breath. You didn't have to. Yes, I did. He helped her onto the wagon seat with perhaps more care than usual. Small towns thrive on gossip. Can't stop it, but I won't stand by and let them tear strips off you for entertainment. As they drove away, she studied his profile. What reputation were they referring to? His jaw tightened. Nothing that matters now. But it did matter. She sensed. Whatever had driven Colt Mercer to his isolated existence carried weight in this town. Their next stop was the land office, where Colt had business with the clerk. While she waited outside, a well-dressed man approached, touching his hat brim with manicured fingers that had never known hard work. Oh, Mrs. Mercer, I believe Ezekiel Thorne. His smile reminded her of a snake's all-surface charm with something cold beneath. I own several properties in the area. I heard about your unfortunate circumstances. My circumstances are quite fortunate now. Thank you. Of course. Still, if things should change, I hope you'll remember that I'm always interested in helping ladies in distress. I have connections back east, could arrange comfortable passage. The lady said she's fine. Colt had materialized beside them, and something in Ezekiel's expression shifted a flash of calculation, quickly hidden. Mercer, just making your wife's acquaintance. Now you've made it. Colt's hand settled on the small of Rosalind's back, proprietary in a way that sent unexpected warmth through her. We'll be going. Ezekiel's smile never wavered. Of course, Mrs. Mercer. A pleasure. I'm sure we'll meet again. As they walked away, Rosalind felt the weight of his gaze between her shoulder blades. Stay clear of him, Colt said quietly. Ezekiel Thorne collects things: land, cattle, people. He sees something he wants. He finds a way to get it. He seems to know you. We've had dealings. His tone suggested those dealings hadn't been pleasant. The ride home was quiet, both lost in thought. As the ranch came into view, Rosalind felt an unexpected sense of homecoming. When had this rough collection of buildings begun to feel like sanctuary? I'm sorry, she said as Colt helped her down. About town, the gossip. I've brought complications to your life. Life was already complicated. He began unloading supplies. Least now it's complicated with better cooking. The attempt at levity made her smile despite everything. Was that a compliment? My word, Mr. Mercer. Be careful or I might swoon. Can't have that. Who'd make supper? It was the closest they'd come to playful banter, and it lightened the day's shadows. They worked together to store the supplies, falling into the rhythm they'd developed, efficient, companionable, careful not to brush against each other in the small spaces. That evening, As Rosalind prepared their meal with the fresh ingredients from town, she found herself humming. The cabin had proper curtains now, cheerful blue calico that softened the harsh light. Small touches were making it more homelike. Her mother's teacups on the shelf, a rag rug by the door, wildflowers in a mason jar on the table. "Smells good," Colt said, coming in from tending the horses. "Beef stew. Mrs. Morrison gave me her recipe." She ladled generous portions into bowls. Said it was her mother's, from Ohio. They ate in comfortable silence until Colt said, "About today, what those women said is partly true." She met his eyes steadily. "I am a mail-order bride who was abandoned. I am fallen from my former station. My hands are rough and my dress is mended." "Rosalind." "But I'm not damaged goods." The words came out fiercer than intended. "I'm not someone to be pitied or collected. I'm learning to stand on my own feet, perhaps for the first time in my life. And while I'm grateful for your kindness, I don't need defending like some helpless creature." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or approval. "No, you don't. But sometimes it's nice to have someone willing to defend you anyway." The simple statement caught her off guard. Is that what we are, defenders of each other? Could be worse things to be. After supper, he brought out a checkerboard, surprising her. "Thought you might like a game. Gets lonely out here with just your own thoughts for company." They played by lamplight, and Rosalind discovered Colt had a strategic mind behind his quiet exterior. He won more often than not, but she gave him good competition. "My father taught me," she said, jumping one of his pieces. "Said it was good for developing logical thinking, even in females." "Smart man." "He was." She fingered one of the wooden pieces. "He would have liked you, I think. He always said to judge a man by his actions, not his words or his past." Colt was quiet for a long moment. "What if his past actions aren't worth much either?" "Then judge him by his present ones." She moved another piece. "King me." Later, as he prepared to leave for the barn, he paused at the door. "Rosalind, what Thorne said about helping ladies in distress, don't trust it. He's got a place outside town where he keeps women who've accepted his help. They don't leave until they've paid back every cent, with interest." The implication chilled her. "You mean?" "I mean, stay clear of him." His voice was hard. "Whatever reputation I've got in town, at least folks know I keep my word and my hands to myself." After he left, Rosalind sat by the window, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The day had shown her how precarious her position was, balanced between respectability and scandal, protection and vulnerability. Yet she didn't regret the path that had led her here. In town, they saw her as Colt Mercer's charity case, a fallen woman lucky to find any man willing to take her in. They didn't see the partnership developing between two damaged souls, the careful respect, the slowly building trust. They didn't see how Colt looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, not with pity or possession, but with something that might have been wonder. She thought about Ezekiel Thorne's calculating eyes, the gossiping women, the way Colt had claimed her as his wife without hesitation. Complications, he'd called it, but perhaps some complications were worth having. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There was talk of a barn dance at the Henderson Ranch next month. More scrutiny, more pretense, more careful navigation of their unusual arrangement. But tonight, she felt something that had been absent since leaving Philadelphia: hope. Not for the future she'd originally imagined, with a respectable marriage to William Thornton, but for something different, possibly better. A future built on her own terms, with her own hands, alongside a man who saw her strength instead of just her circumstances. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the wall. Somewhere in the barn. She knew Colt was probably sitting up too, perhaps playing his harmonica or mending tack, always busy, always maintaining that careful distance that protected them both. For now, it was enough. They were building something here. slow and steady as the turning of seasons. What it would become remained to be seen, but Rosalind found herself looking forward to discovering it. The wind picked up outside, rattling the new curtains, but inside the cabin was warm and safe, a small circle of light against the vast darkness of the prairie. Home, she thought, testing the word. It was starting to fit. The drought had stretched through 6 weeks of cloudless skies, turning the grassland brittle as old paper. Dust devils danced across the scorched earth, and the creek that fed the ranch had dwindled to a trickle. Rosalind watched Colt's face grow more worried with each passing day, though he tried to hide it behind his usual stoicism. "We'll need to move the cattle to the north pasture," he said over breakfast, pushing eggs around his plate without eating. "Still some water in the old reservoir there." "I'll help," Rosalind offered, as she had every day since the crisis began. This time, instead of refusing, he nodded. "Can you ride?" "A little. I had lessons as a girl." "Side saddle won't work for driving cattle. You'll need to ride astride." The impropriety of it would have scandalized her former self. Now she merely nodded. "Then teach me." That afternoon found her in the corral with Belle, Colt's patient mare. Rosalind had changed into a split skirt she'd fashioned from one of her old dresses, a compromise between propriety and practicality. "Easy now," Colt coached, his hand steady on the bridle. "She can feel if you're nervous. Breathe deep. Relax into the saddle." Rosalind tried to focus on his instructions rather than on how close he stood, the way his voice dropped to that gentle tone he used with spooked horses. When Belle moved forward at a walk, she clutched the saddle horn. "Don't fight her movement. Rock with it like you're dancing." "I'm not much of a dancer these days." "Could have fooled me." The words slipped out before he could stop them, and color touched his weathered cheeks. "I mean, you move well. Graceful-like." It was the closest he'd come to a compliment about anything other than her cooking or her growing ranch skills. Rosalind felt warmth bloom in her chest. "My dancing master would be horrified to see me now," she said lightly, trying to ease his embarrassment. "Astride a horse in a makeshift skirt, covered in dust. You look—" He stopped himself, adjusting Belle's bridle unnecessarily. "You're doing fine. Try a trot." By week's end, she could stay in the saddle well enough to help with the cattle drive. They rose before dawn, the air already warm and still. Colt had given her an old hat of his, too large but necessary against the sun. "Stay on the flanks," he instructed as they approached the herd. "If they start to scatter, just wave your hat and holler. They'll move away from you." The work was hot, dusty, and exhausting. Rosalind's throat burned from the dust. Her muscles ached from the unfamiliar activity, but she kept pace. When a young steer broke from the herd, she reacted on instinct, wheeling Belle to cut it off. "Well done," Colt called, real appreciation in his voice. They were settling the herd near the reservoir when the riders appeared 4 men, led by one whose expensive clothes marked him clearly. Ezekiel Thorne touched his hat in mock courtesy. "Mercer, Mrs. Mercer, working hard, I see." "Thorne." Colt's hand moved casually to rest near his sidearm. "You're on Box J land." MI boundaries get so unclear during drought times. Ezekiel's smile was sharp. Water becomes precious. Men might do anything to secure it. This reservoir belongs to the Box J, has for 20 years. Papers can be lost. Claims can be disputed. Ezekiel's gaze lingered on Rosalind, taking in her dusty appearance with amusement. "Shame to see a lady reduced to common labor. My offer still stands. Mrs. Mercer, I could make things comfortable for you." "I'm quite comfortable where I am," Rosalind said firmly. "Are you, because from where I sit, you look like a woman who's fallen far from where she started. I could help you rise again." "The lady said she's not interested." Colt's voice carried a warning edge. Ezekiel laughed. "Protective. Aren't you? Tell me, Mercer, does she know why you really left the cavalry? Does she know about Fort Laramie? The change in Colt was instantaneous. His whole body went rigid, his face draining of color, then flushing dark. Get off this land, now! Touched a nerve, did I? Ezekiel's satisfaction was evident. Perhaps your wife should know what kind of man she's tied herself to. The kind who... I said get out. Colt's hand dropped to his gun. Before I forget, there's a lady present. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Ezekiel's men shifted nervously, hands hovering near their own weapons. For a moment, violence seemed inevitable. Then Rosalind urged Belle forward, placing herself between the two groups. Mr. Thorne, you're trespassing on private property and harassing lawful residents. I believe that's illegal even in Wyoming territory. Shall we ride to town and discuss this with the sheriff? Ezekiel's expression soured. The sheriff, she'd learned, was one of the few honest lawmen in the territory, immune to bribes. No need for that. He gathered his reins. We'll continue this another time. Mercer, when you don't have your woman to hide behind. They watched the riders disappear into the heat shimmer before Colt finally spoke. You shouldn't have done that. Put yourself in the middle. Someone had to... She studied his profile, seeing the tension still vibrating through him. Fort Laramie. Leave it be, Rosalind. But that night, after a silent supper, he surprised her by speaking. I was at Fort Laramie in 68 inches, he said quietly, staring into his coffee. Part of a detail sent to patrol the Bozeman Trail. We got bad intelligence. Rode into an ambush. Half my unit died in the first 5 minutes. Rosalind waited, sensing there was more. I was in command. My decisions, my responsibility. The Army cleared me of wrongdoing. Said it wasn't my fault. But tell that to the families of the men who didn't come home. His laugh was bitter. Thorne's brother was one of them. He's never forgiven me for surviving when better men didn't. You couldn't have known. Doesn't matter. I gave the orders. I led them in. He stood abruptly. Now you know why my reputation in town isn't worth much. The man who got his soldiers killed playing at being an officer. He left before she could respond, the door closing with quiet finality. Rosalind sat alone, processing this glimpse into the shadows Colt carried. No wonder he'd chosen isolation, chosen to drift rather than put down roots. Roots meant connections, and connections meant the risk of failing people again. She found him by the corral, brushing Belle with mechanical strokes. Running away doesn't change anything, she said softly. Didn't say it did. Then why do it? He paused in his brushing. You ever carry something so heavy it bends your spine, only way to stand straight is to put it down. But you haven't put it down. You've just carried it somewhere else. What would you know about it? The words came out harsh. You with your tea sets and finishing school and my father who drank himself to death after mother died. My aunt, who told me daily what a burden I was. My fiancé, who sold me like livestock when a better offer came along. She stepped closer. We all carry things. Colt, the difference is whether we let them bury us. He turned to face her fully, something raw in his expression. I got good men killed. You made the best decision you could with what you knew. That's all anyone can do. It wasn't enough. It never is. That's what makes us human. They stood in the moonlight, the space between them charged with unspoken things. Then Colt reached out, his work-roughened fingers barely grazing her cheek. You've got dust, he said roughly, from today. I'm sure I do. She didn't move, barely breathed, as his thumb brushed across her cheekbone. Rosalind. Her name came out like a prayer or a warning. I know. She whispered. I know all the reasons why not, but just for a moment. He pulled her against him, and she discovered he was trembling. This strong, steady man who faced down gunmen without flinching was shaking as he held her. She wrapped her arms around him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the way he seemed to curve around her as if shielding her from the world. You terrify me, he admitted into her hair. The way you make me want things I've got no right to want. What things? A future, a reason to stop running. His arms tightened. You! She pulled back enough to see his face. Shadowed, but dear. I'm not asking you to be perfect. Colt, I'm not perfect either. I'm asking you to try with me. He cupped her face in both hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. You deserve better than a broken-down soldier with blood on his hands and too many ghosts. Maybe, but I want the man who took in a stranger, who teaches me patience with horses and doesn't laugh when I burn biscuits, who defends my honor even when I don't ask him to. She covered his hands with hers. I want you, ghosts and all. He kissed her then, gentle as his touch with frightened animals, careful as if she might spook and run. She leaned into him, tasting coffee and dust and something essentially cold. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. This changes things, he said unnecessarily. Everything's been changing since the day we met. I mean, with the sleeping arrangements, the pretense in town, everything. Then we'll figure it out as we go, like we've been doing all along. He laughed softly, wonderingly. You make it sound simple. The best things usually are, underneath all the complications we pile on top. They walked back to the cabin together, her hand in his. At the door, he stopped. I'll still bunk in the barn tonight. We should, that is, there are proper ways. Always the gentleman, she said, touching his cheek, even when you're trying so hard not to be. Especially then. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. Good night, Rosalind. Good night, Colt. Inside, she pressed her back against the closed door, heart racing, through the window. She watched him walk to the barn, his figure silver in the moonlight. Everything had shifted tonight, tectonic plates of emotion sliding into new configurations. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, Ezekiel's threats, the ongoing drought, the complicated dance of two damaged people learning to trust. But tonight, she'd held him and been held, had spoken truth and heard it in return. The lamp flame flickered, casting familiar shadows. But everything felt different now, charged with possibility. On the shelf, her mother's teacups gleamed like promises. Outside, she heard the faint strains of Colt's harmonica, not the mournful Lorena tonight, but something lighter, almost joyful. She smiled, touching her lips where the memory of his kiss lingered. Let the drought come. Let Ezekiel scheme. Let the town gossip. She and Colt would face it together, no longer dancing around each other but with each other, partners in truth as well as circumstance. The West had taken everything she'd thought she wanted and given her something she'd never dared to dream of instead. Not a comfortable marriage to a stranger, but a partnership forged in dust and hardship, seasoned with respect, and warmed by a love neither had expected to find. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight, she had the memory of strong arms and whispered confessions, the promise of a future written not in formal letters but in shared glances and work-worn hands clasped together. It was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The storm rolled in at sunset, turning the sky the color of an old bruise. Lightning flickered along the horizon as Colt secured the shutters, his movements quick and efficient. They'd spent the day preparing moving tools inside, reinforcing the chicken coop, bringing the horses into the barn. Never seen clouds that green before, Rosalind said, helping him carry water buckets inside. Nothing good comes from green clouds. He tested the door latch, frowning. This could be bad. Maybe you should. If you're about to suggest I go to town while you weather this alone, you can save your breath. She set down her bucket firmly. Partners, remember, it had been 2 weeks since their moonlight confession. 2 weeks of careful renegotiation of boundaries. Colt still slept in the barn, but he took his meals in the cabin now, lingering over coffee while they talked. Small touches had become commonplace, his hand on her waist as he helped her down from the wagon, her fingers brushing his as she passed him tools. The first fat raindrops hit as they finished the last preparations. Then, as if someone had overturned a massive bucket, the deluge began. They barely made it inside before the wind hit, slamming into the cabin like a living thing. "Away from the windows," Colt ordered, pulling her toward the center of the room as something crashed outside. The lamp flickered wildly, throwing dancing shadows. Rain hammered the roof like bullets, and the wind's howl rose to a banshee shriek. The cabin groaned under the assault. "The animals," Rosalind started, "are as safe as we could make them." A tremendous crack split the air, followed by a crash that shook the walls. That was the old cottonwood by the creek. The lamp went out, plunging them into darkness save for the intermittent lightning flashes. Colt found her hand in the dark, pulling her close as another gust struck the cabin. "It's held through worse," he said against her hair, though she could feel the tension in him. They huddled together on the floor, backs against the wall farthest from the windows. The storm raged like something personal, as if it had come specifically for them. Rosalind had never experienced anything like it, the raw power, the sense of being utterly at nature's mercy. A window shattered, letting in a spray of rain and debris. Colt immediately shielded her with his body, cursing as something struck his shoulder. "Are you hurt?" "Just flying glass. Stay down." He crawled to the window, fighting against the wind to secure a piece of oilcloth over the opening. In the lightning flashes, she saw blood on his shirt, but knew better than to distract him now. The storm seemed endless, each moment stretching like an hour. They pressed together in their corner, Colt's arms around her, her face buried against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, steady despite everything, and focused on that rhythm rather than the chaos outside. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the worst passed. The wind dropped from a roar to a moan, the rain from assault to merely heavy. They stayed frozen for long moments, afraid to trust the relative quiet. "I think," Colt began, just as a different sound cut through the storm's trailing edge. Hoofbeats, multiple riders, approaching fast. He was on his feet instantly, reaching for his gun. "Stay inside." "Colt." But he was already at the door, easing it open. The riders materialized from the Rain Ezekiel Thorne and 6 men, all armed. "Hell of a storm." "Mercer," Ezekiel called out, water streaming from his expensive hat. "Thought we'd check on our neighbors, make sure everyone survived." "We're fine. You can move along." "Now, is that any way to treat concerned citizens? We heard there might be rustlers about, taking advantage of the weather. Thought we'd help you check your stock." Colt stepped fully outside, letting the door close behind him. Rosalind moved to the broken window, peering through a gap in the oilcloth. "No rustlers here, Thorne, just storm damage." "You sure about that? Because some of your cattle were found mixed with mine last week. Man might think you were the one doing the rustling." "Those were Box J cattle on Box J land, and you know it." "Do I gets confusing in weather like this? Fences blow down. Brands can look mighty similar in poor light." Ezekiel leaned forward in his saddle. "Of course, misunderstandings can be cleared up. I'm a reasonable man. That reservoir, for instance, shame for neighbors to fight over water. Maybe we could work out a sharing arrangement." "The reservoir belongs to Jim Jameson. Take it up with him." "But you're here, and he's not. Man in possession is 9/10 of the law." Lightning illuminated Ezekiel's cold smile. "Unless that man can't hold on to what he has." One of Thorne's men had dismounted, moving toward the barn. Colt's voice cracked like a whip. "Tell your boy to get back on his horse." "Just checking for storm damage. Neighborly concern." I said. The barn door opened, and Jake Tanner, one of Thorne's hired guns, emerged with a satisfied grin. "Boss, You'll want to see this. Found a running iron hidden in the hay." Colt went very still. "That's not mine." "No, found on your property, in your barn." Ezekiel's satisfaction was evident. "Running iron's rustler's tools. Mercer, sheriff takes a dim view of rustling. You planted that. Prove it." Ezekiel turned his horse. "Boys, I think we found our rustler. Jake, you and Sam stay here. Make sure Mercer doesn't go anywhere before we get back with the sheriff. Wouldn't want him running off like he did from Fort Laramie." Rosalind had heard enough. She grabbed the shotgun from above the door and stepped outside. "That's close enough, Mr. Thorne." The men froze, staring at the woman in her rain-soaked dress, holding the gun with steady hands. "Mrs. Mercer." Ezekiel recovered first. "This is men's business. No need to trouble yourself. When armed men threaten my home, it becomes my business." She kept the barrel trained on him. "You're trespassing. Again, leave now, or I'll be forced to defend my property." "You'd shoot me, a woman like you." "I've learned many new skills since coming west." Her voice was steady as the gun. "Would you like a demonstration?" Jake Tanner laughed. "Boss, she's bluffing. No Eastern lady's going to—" The shotgun blast cut him off, pellets striking the ground inches from his horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing him. "That was your warning," Rosalind said calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "The next one won't miss." "You're making a mistake," Ezekiel snarled. "I own half this county. You can't—" "I can and I will." She pumped the shotgun, chambering another round. "My husband served his country with honor while you've done nothing but prey on the vulnerable. You're not worthy to speak his name, much less spread lies about him." Colt moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "You heard the lady? Get off our land." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. 7 armed men against 2 defenders. Then Ezekiel smiled, cold as winter frost. "This isn't over. You've assaulted my men, threatened peaceable citizens. The law will hear about this." "Good," Rosalind said. "I look forward to telling Sheriff Morrison how you tried to plant evidence on our property. I'm sure he'll be very interested." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. He'd overplayed his hand, and they all knew it. "Mount up, boys. We'll settle this another way." They watched until the riders disappeared into the rain-swept darkness. Only then did Rosalind lower the gun, her hands beginning to shake. "You could have been killed," Colt said roughly, taking the weapon from her. "So could you." She noticed the blood seeping through his shirt. "You're hurt. Let me see." Inside, by lamplight. She cleaned the gash on his shoulder, not deep, but needing attention. He sat still under her ministrations, watching her face. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "I didn't. That was the first time I've ever fired a gun." Her hands trembled slightly as she tied off the bandage. "I just knew I couldn't let them take you." He caught her hands, stilling their movement. "Rosalind." "No." She met his eyes. "Don't tell me it was foolish or dangerous. I know that. But they were going to frame you, maybe kill you. I couldn't just hide inside and let it happen." "You called me your husband." Heat touched her cheeks. "It seemed strategic, in the moment." "Is that all it was, strategy?" The question hung between them, heavy with possibility. Outside, the storm was finally passing, leaving only the steady drum of rain on the roof. "You know it wasn't," she whispered. He stood, pulling her against him. "This is getting complicated." It was always complicated. She rested her head against his chest, careful of his shoulder. "The question is what we do about it." "I know what I want to do." His voice was rough. "But you deserve better than a rushed decision in the middle of a crisis. You deserve courting, proper proposals, all of it." "I've had proper proposals. Look where it got me." She pulled back to see his face. I don't need grand gestures. Colt, I need truth. A truth. He cupped her face gently. Truth is I love you. Have for weeks. Maybe since that first day when you stood there pointing that little derringer at me like you could take on the world. Truth is, it terrifies me because everyone I've ever loved, I've failed. You haven't failed me. Not yet. Not ever, she said firmly. We're partners. Remember, in everything. That means sharing the weight, not carrying it alone. He kissed her then, different from their first kiss, deeper, more certain, full of promise. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, he rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he said quietly. Not for the town or appearances or protection. Marry me because I can't imagine facing another storm without you beside me. Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. Yes, Colt. They stood together in the lamp-lit cabin while outside the storm finally exhausted itself. Tomorrow would bring new challenges Ezekiel wouldn't give up easily, and the planted evidence would need to be dealt with. But tonight, they had this moment, this declaration, this promise of a future together. I should check the animals, Colt said eventually, though he made no move to leave her arms. In a minute, she held him tighter. Just stay for a minute. They stayed for much longer than a minute, holding each other while the cabin settled around them, storm-battered but still standing. Like them, Rosalind thought. Weathered by circumstances but stronger for it. When Colt finally went to check the damage, she went with him. They were partners now in truth as well as pretense. Whatever came next, Ezekiel's schemes, the town's judgment, the harsh realities of frontier life, they would face it together. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp with promise. Stars began to appear through the breaking clouds, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, not threatening now, just part of the vast Wyoming night that was becoming home. The night wrapped around them like velvet as they sat vigil in the storm-damaged cabin. Colt's shoulder throbbed where the glass had cut him, but Rosalind's gentle ministrations had eased the worst of it. She'd insisted on staying close, checking his bandage every hour despite his protests that he'd survived worse. Can't sleep, he asked softly, finding her by the boarded window as the clock struck 3. Too much to think about. She turned to him, her face ethereal in the moonlight filtering through cracks. Everything that's happened, everything that's changing. He moved behind her, careful not to crowd, but she leaned back against him with a soft sigh. Regrets? No, never that. She covered his hands with hers where they rested on her waist. Just processing. 3 months ago, I was planning a wedding to a stranger. Now you're engaged to a different stranger. She turned in his arms, looking up at him with those violet eyes that had haunted his dreams since the day they met. You're not a stranger, Colt. I think I know you better than I've ever known anyone. That's so. I know you take your coffee black but add sugar when you think I'm not looking. I know you favor your left shoulder on cold mornings from that old wound. I know you talk to the horses like they're old friends. And you check on me 3 times each night when you think I'm asleep. I didn't know you'd noticed. I notice everything about you. Her fingers traced the edge of his collar. I know you're kind beneath all that caution. I know you die before breaking your word. I know you carry guilt that isn't yours to bear. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his chest where his heart beat too fast. What else do you know? I know I love you, she whispered. Not because you saved me, but because you saw me as more than something to save. The words undid him. He pulled her closer, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the scent of lavender and gunpowder, an unlikely combination that was purely Rosalind. I don't deserve you, he said roughly. Good thing it's not about deserving then. She pulled back to frame his face with her hands. It's about choosing. And I choose you, Colt Mercer, tonight and always. He kissed her then, pouring everything he couldn't say into the connection: gratitude, wonder, a love so fierce it sometimes stole his breath. She responded with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, holding him as if he might disappear. When they finally parted, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "We should. That is, there are proper ways. Always so concerned with propriety," she teased gently. "Even now. Especially now." He smoothed a strand of hair from her face. "You deserve to be courted right, married proper, not rushing into something because of danger and adrenaline." "Is that what you think this is, adrenaline?" "I think," he said carefully, "that you're an extraordinary woman who's been through extraordinary circumstances. I don't want you to have regrets come morning." She studied him for a long moment, then stepped back. "You're right. We should do this properly." At his surprised look, she smiled. "But Colt, I won't have regrets. Not about this. Not about us." They spent the remaining hours until dawn sitting together at the table, hands linked, talking about everything and nothing. Plans for the ranch, dreams they'd never voiced, fears they'd carried alone. It was its own kind of intimacy, perhaps deeper than what might have been. As the first light painted the eastern sky, Colt squeezed her hand. "I need to ride to town. Talk to the sheriff about last night. Will you be all right here?" "I'll be fine. But you shouldn't go alone, not with Thorne's threats." "I'll take Sam Henderson with me. His place is on the way, and he's no friend of Thorne's." She helped him saddle Belle, checking his bandage one more time. "Be careful." "Always am." He caught her hand as she turned to go. "Rosalind, when I get back, would you take a ride with me? There's something I want to show you." "A mysterious ride? How intriguing." "Maybe a little mystery's good for a relationship," he said with a rare smile. She watched him ride away, tall in the saddle despite his injury, and felt a flutter of anticipation. Whatever he wanted to show her, she sensed it was important. The morning passed in a blur of activity. She cleaned up storm damage, tended the animals, started bread for dinner. Normal tasks that felt charged with new meaning. She was going to be Colt's wife, not in pretense, but in truth. It was near noon when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. She grabbed the shotgun, heart racing, then relaxed as she recognized Sam Henderson's gray mare. But as they drew closer, she saw Colt wasn't riding. He was tied face down across Belle's saddle. "Mrs. Mercer." Sam Henderson leaped from his horse. "He's hurt bad. Ambush on the road. I found him about 2 miles out." Together they got Colt inside, laying him on the bed. Blood soaked his shirt more than just the reopened shoulder wound. A bullet had caught him in the side. Another had grazed his temple. "Need the doctor?" she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Already sent my boy. Doc should be here within the hour." Sam's weathered face was grim. "Looked like Thorne's men from the tracks. Cowards shot from cover." Rosalind's hands moved automatically, using skills learned at her father's side years ago. Stop the bleeding, clean the wounds, keep him comfortable. But inside, she was screaming. Colt's eyes fluttered open as she worked. "Rosa," her name came out slurred. "I'm here. You're safe." "Sorry. Wanted to show you." His hand moved weakly, and she caught it. "Hush! Save your strength." "The meadow?" He managed. "Past the big pine. Wanted to marry you there, where the wildflowers—" "And you will," she said fiercely. "You'll show me your meadow, and we'll be married there, just as you planned. But you have to fight. Colt, you have to stay with me." His fingers tightened briefly on hers before his eyes closed again. Dr. Hartley arrived in a whirl of efficiency, taking over with practiced skill. Rosalind was relegated to fetching water and supplies, each trip feeling like miles when all she wanted was to stay by Colt's side. "Bullet's still in there," the doctor said after his examination. Need to get it out. This is going to be rough. Ma'am, might want to wait outside. I'm staying. She held Colt's hand through the surgery, murmuring encouragement when he thrashed against the pain. His face was gray, beaded with sweat, but he fought just as she'd asked him to. Got it, Doc Hartley finally announced, dropping the bullet into a basin with a metallic clink. Now we wait. He's lost a lot of blood, and there's always risk of infection. Next 24 hours will tell. After the doctor left, promising to return in the morning, Rosalind settled beside the bed. Sam Henderson had offered to stay, but she'd sent him home to his family with thanks. This vigil was hers to keep. The afternoon crawled by. She bathed Colt's fevered face, changed bandages, forced water between his lips when he'd take it. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for men who must have died at Fort Laramie, sometimes reaching for her. "Don't you dare leave me," she whispered, clutching his hand. Not now. Not when we just found each other. As evening painted shadows across the room, he seemed to settle. His breathing evened out, and some color returned to his face. Rosalind allowed herself to hope. She must have dozed, because she woke to find him watching her with clearer eyes than he'd had all day. "Hey there," he said softly. "Hey yourself." She touched his face, reassuring herself he was real and present. "How do you feel?" "Like I got shot." His attempt at a smile turned into a wince. "Twice." "It's not funny." "I know." He caught her hand. "I'm sorry. Didn't mean to scare you." "Scare me." Her control finally cracked. "I thought you were dying, I thought." Tears came then, all the fear and tension of the day pouring out. "Come here." He tugged weakly at her hand. "Please." She carefully stretched out beside him on the narrow bed, mindful of his injuries. He wrapped his good arm around her, holding her as she cried. "I'm too stubborn to die," he murmured into her hair. "Especially when I've got something to live for." "You better be." She pressed her face against his neck, breathing him in. "Because I refuse to be widowed before I'm even married." They lay quietly as darkness fell, listening to each other breathe. Despite everything, the pain, the danger, the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring, Rosalind felt a deep peace settle over her. They were together. Everything else could be faced. "Tell me about your meadow," she said eventually. "Found it my first week here. Hidden spot past the pine grove, sheltered by hills. Come spring, it's carpeted with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, lupine, prairie roses. There's a little creek runs through it, clear as glass." His voice grew drowsy. "Knew right away it's where I'd marry, if I ever found someone. Never thought I would. Until you." "It sounds perfect." "You're perfect." "Now I know you're delirious." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Maybe, but it's still true." She stayed with him through the night, dozing fitfully, waking whenever he stirred. By morning, his fever had broken and the doctor pronounced him on the mend. "He's lucky," Doc Hartley said. "An inch to the left and that bullet would have hit something vital. He'll be laid up for a few weeks, but he'll recover." "Thank you," Rosalind said, weak with relief. "Thank yourself. Your quick action probably saved his life." The doctor packed his bag. "You've got healing hands. Mrs. Mercer, ever consider nursing?" "My father was a doctor. I used to help him." "Well, you've got the instincts. Keep those wounds clean. Make him rest, though that'll be the real challenge with men like him, and send for me if anything changes." After he left, Rosalind returned to Colt's bedside. He was sleeping peacefully now, the gray pallor replaced by more natural color. She smoothed the hair back from his forehead, overwhelmed by tenderness. This man, this difficult, honorable, wounded man, had become her whole world. The thought of losing him had nearly broken her, but they'd survived. Again. A rider approaching made her tense, but it was Sheriff Morrison, his badge glinting in the morning sun. Mrs. Mercer heard about the trouble. How is he? Recovering? She stepped onto the porch, not wanting to wake Colt. Did you find who did this? Working on it. Got some interesting news. Though, Ezekiel Thorne left town sudden-like this morning. Business in Denver. Supposedly. Convenient timing. Very convenient. That's what I thought. The sheriff studied her. Sam Henderson told me about last night. The planted evidence. I'll need Colt's statement when he's able. But I believe your version of events. Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. Thorne's got influence. Even from Denver. This isn't over. He touched his hat. You take care, ma'am, both of you. After he left, Rosalind made soup, coaxing Colt to eat when he woke. He was weak but improving, and she finally felt the knot in her chest begin to ease. Stop looking at me like I might disappear, he said, catching her worried glance. Can't help it. She adjusted his pillows. You gave me quite a scare. Mr. Mercer. I'll try to avoid getting shot in the future. See that you do. He caught her hand as she turned away. Rosalind, what we talked about before, it hasn't changed. Soon as I'm on my feet, we're getting married. Properly. With the preacher and witnesses and your meadow full of flowers. Our meadow, she corrected. And yes, we are. But for now, you rest. The future will keep. As she watched him drift back to sleep, Rosalind felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her. They'd weathered so much already: abandonment, drought, storms, violence. But they'd weathered it together, and that made all the difference. Outside, the sun climbed higher, promising another hot day. But inside their small cabin, there was peace. They were battered but not broken, challenged but not conquered. And soon, very soon, they would stand in a meadow of wildflowers and pledge themselves to each other for all the world to see. The thought made her smile. From abandoned bride to beloved partner, it wasn't the journey she'd planned, but it was the one that had led her home. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge stood like a monument to frontier justice, weathered wood, and determination, holding firm against the Wyoming wind. Rosalind sat in the front row, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she watched Colt take the witness stand. 3 weeks had passed since the shooting, and though he still moved carefully, his gray eyes were clear and steady. State your name for the record, Judge Harrison instructed. Colt Mercer. Mr. Mercer, tell us about the night of September 15th. Colt's testimony was measured, factual, the storm, Thorne's arrival, the planted running iron. He spoke without embellishment, his military bearing evident in the precise way he recounted events. And your wife, what was her involvement? She defended our property when threatened. Pride colored his voice. Nothing more, nothing less. Ezekiel Thorne sat at the defendant's table, having been summoned back from Denver to face charges. His expensive suit and oiled hair couldn't disguise the fury simmering beneath his composed exterior. His lawyer, imported from Cheyenne, was slick as oil and twice as slippery. Mr. Mercer. The lawyer began his cross-examination. Isn't it true you were discharged from the cavalry under questionable circumstances? Objection! The prosecutor called relevance. Goes to the witness's credibility, Your Honor. I'll allow it. Colt's jaw tightened. I received an honorable discharge after the incident at Fort Laramie. Incident? Is that what you call getting half your unit killed? Rosalind saw Colt's hands clench where they rested on the witness box, but his voice remained level. I call it the worst day of my life, but it has nothing to do with Ezekiel Thorne trying to steal water rights through intimidation. Doesn't it? A man prone to poor judgment, living beyond the edge of civilization with a woman who isn't really his wife. Objection. The prosecutor was on his feet, but Colt spoke over him. Rosalind Carter is my wife in every way that matters. We'll make it legal as soon as this trial's done, But paper doesn't make a marriage. Trust does, honor does. He looked directly at Thorne. 2 things you know nothing about. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harrison banged his gavel for order. The trial continued for 2 days. Witnesses came forward, Sam Henderson testifying about finding Colt shot on the road. Sheriff Morrison presenting the running iron that had mysteriously appeared in Colt's barn. Even Tom Morrison from the general store testified about Thorne's attempts to pressure local ranchers. But it was Rosalind's testimony that turned the tide. Mrs. Mercer. The prosecutor began gently. I know this is difficult. Can you tell us what happened that night? She sat straight-backed in her simple blue dress. Every inch the lady, despite her sun-browned skin and work-roughened hands. Mr. Thorne and his men came to our property during the storm. They were armed and threatening. What kind of threats? He implied he would have my husband arrested for rustling based on planted evidence. He wanted access to water that didn't belong to him. When we refused, he made it clear there would be consequences. And did you discharge a weapon at Mr. Thorne's men? I fired a warning shot when they refused to leave our property. Her chin lifted. I would do it again. The defense lawyer stood for cross-examination, his smile condescending. Miss Carter, excuse me, Mrs. Mercer, where exactly were you married? As my husband said, we consider ourselves married in the eyes of God, but not the law. The law has many requirements that don't always align with what's right. She met his gaze steadily. I've learned to distinguish between the two since coming west. Indeed. And what else have you learned? How to shoot, how to threaten respectable businessmen? I've learned that respectability is about actions, not appearances. Her voice carried clearly through the courtroom. I've learned that a man who ambushes another from cover is a coward, regardless of his bank account. And yes, I've learned to defend what's mine. And what exactly is yours, a ranch that belongs to someone else? A man you're not legally bound to? Rosalind stood, and though she was small, she seemed to fill the room. What's mine is the life I've built with my own hands, the home I've made from nothing, the partnership I've forged with the best man I've ever known. And if that threatens men like Mr. Thorne, perhaps they should examine why. The silence that followed was complete. Then someone in the back started clapping Martha Henderson, Sam's wife. Others joined in until Judge Harrison had to restore order again. Anything else? The judge asked the defense lawyer, who looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. No further questions. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty of harassment. Guilty of trespassing. Guilty of assault. The ambush on Colt couldn't be definitively proven as Thorne's doing, but the jury clearly had their suspicions. Ezekiel Thorne, Judge Harrison intoned, you are sentenced to 6 months in territorial prison and ordered to pay restitution. Furthermore, you are barred from coming within 1 mile of the Mercer property. Thorne's face went purple. This is a miscarriage of justice, that saddle tramp and his woman. That's enough. The judge's gavel came down hard. 1 more word and I'll add contempt charges. As the bailiff led Thorne away, he caught Rosalind's eye. The look he gave her was pure venom, a promise that this wasn't over. She met it without flinching, her hand finding Colt's. Outside the courthouse, the September sun was bright and clean. Neighbors gathered around them, the Hendersons, Tom Morrison, even Mrs. Bartlett, who'd gossiped so viciously before. That was brave, what you did in there. Mrs. Bartlett said awkwardly. Both of you. Just told the truth. Rosalind replied simply, sometimes that's the bravest thing of all. The woman admitted before moving away. Sheriff Morrison approached, his weathered face creased in a smile. Well done, both of you. Thorne's had this coming for years. He'll be back. Colt said quietly, 6 months isn't long. Maybe, maybe not. Word is his creditors in Denver aren't happy about this scandal. Might find himself too busy saving his business empire to worry about one ranch. The sheriff touched his hat. Either way, you've got friends now. Remember that. As the crowd dispersed, Reverend Williams approached. I heard there might be a wedding in the offing. Rosalind felt Colt's arm tighten around her waist. There is, soon as possible. How about Saturday? Give you a few days to prepare. Let word spread so folks can celebrate with you proper. Saturday's perfect, Rosalind said, her heart singing. The ride home was quiet, both processing the day's events. As they neared the ranch, Colt guided Belle off the main trail. Where are we going? Figured it was time I showed you that meadow. They wound through stands of pine and aspen, the late afternoon light filtering golden through the leaves. Then the trees opened up, and Rosalind gasped. The meadow was everything he'd described and more, sheltered by gentle hills, carpeted with late-blooming wildflowers, bisected by a creek that caught the light like scattered diamonds. It was perfect, wild and beautiful, and theirs. Colt dismounted and helped her down, keeping her hand in his. This is it. This is where I want to marry you. Oh, Colt. Tears pricked her eyes. It's beautiful. You're beautiful. He turned her to face him, his expression serious. Rosalind, I need to say something. In that courtroom, hearing those things dragged up again, Fort Laramie. My failures. Stop. She pressed her fingers to his lips. That's the past. We're about the future. Remember? Let me finish. He caught her hand, holding it against his chest. I used to think my past disqualified me from happiness, that what happened at Fort Laramie meant I didn't deserve love or a home or any kind of peace. Then you showed up with your violet eyes and your stubborn chin, refusing to be beaten down by circumstance. Colt, you made me believe I could be better than my worst day. You looked at me and saw something worth saving, worth fighting for. In that courtroom today, when you stood up and claimed me. Claimed us. His voice roughened. I've never been prouder or more humbled in my life. We claimed each other, she corrected softly. That's what partners do. He kissed her then, there in their meadow with the sun painting everything gold. When they parted, he kept her close. Saturday can't come fast enough. 3 days, she agreed. Think we can manage? We've managed everything else. He looked around the meadow. We'll need to clear a space for the ceremony. Maybe set up some benches. It's perfect as it is. She tugged him toward a patch of purple asters. We'll stand right here, where the flowers are thickest. Let nature be our decoration. They spent an hour planning, walking the meadow hand in hand, dreaming aloud about their future. By the time they headed home, shadows were lengthening across the land. I have one more thing to tell you, Colt said as they neared the ranch. I talked to Jim Jameson yesterday. He's offered to sell me this section. The cabin, the land, water rights, everything, fair price, with time to pay. Rosalind reined in her horse. Truly! Said he was impressed by how we've handled things. Wants neighbors he can count on. Colt's smile was boyish, transforming his face. What do you say, soon-to-be Mrs. Mercer, ready to be landowners? Yes, she laughed, joy bubbling up like creek water. Yes to all of it. The next 3 days passed in a whirlwind. News of the wedding spread through the territory like wildfire. Martha Henderson organized the women to prepare food, while Sam and the other men insisted on building proper benches for the ceremony. Rosalind found herself with an unexpected problem. She had nothing suitable to wear. Her green traveling dress was too associated with bad memories, and her work dresses were hardly wedding material. I could ride to Cheyenne, Colt offered, finding her fretting over her limited wardrobe. Get you something proper. There's no time. She fingered the calico sadly. I suppose it doesn't matter. Oh, yes, it does. Martha Henderson swept into the cabin with an armload of fabric. Every bride deserves to feel beautiful on her wedding day. Now, I've brought some of my daughter's things. She's about your size, and between all us women, we'll have you fitted out properly. By Friday evening, Rosalind had a wedding dress. Not the elaborate creation she might have worn in Philadelphia, but something better, a simple white cotton dress sprigged with tiny blue flowers, made with love by women who'd become friends. "You look beautiful," Colt said when he saw her trying it on. "You're not supposed to see me before the wedding." "Too late." He crossed to her, running his hands down her arms. "Besides, we've never done things the conventional way." "No," she agreed, leaning into him. "We haven't." The morning of their wedding dawned clear and perfect. Rosalind woke to find wildflowers on her doorstep. Colt had risen early to gather them. She tucked prairie roses in her hair and carried a bouquet of Indian paintbrush and asters. The meadow had been transformed. Rough benches held what seemed like half the territory. Ribbons fluttered from the aspens, and someone had created an altar from hay bales and wildflowers. But Rosalind only had eyes for Colt. He stood at their chosen spot among the asters, wearing his best shirt and a look of wonder that made her heart skip. Sam Henderson stood beside him as best man, while Martha waited to stand with her. Reverend Williams beamed as she approached. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we gather in God's own cathedral to witness something special, two people who've found each other against all odds, who've built something beautiful from hardship." The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional with one addition. When it came time for promises, Colt took both her hands. "I promise to be your partner in all things," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "To stand with you against whatever storms come. To build our life together day by day, season by season. To love you not in spite of your strength, but because of it." Rosalind had to swallow past the lump in her throat. "I promise to see you as you are, not your past, not others' judgments, but the man who gave me shelter and became my home. To work beside you, dream with you, and face whatever comes knowing we face it together. By the power vested in me," Reverend Williams declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." The cheer that went up could probably be heard in Cedar Ridge, but Rosalind heard only her heart singing as Colt kissed her, there in their meadow with their community, witnessing and the Wyoming sky stretching endless above. The celebration lasted until nightfall. Tables groaned under the weight of food. Fiddles played for dancing, and even crusty old ranchers were seen wiping their eyes during the toasts. "To Colt and Rosalind," Sheriff Morrison raised his glass, "who showed us all that sometimes the best things come from the worst circumstances." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Colt and Rosalind finally stole away. They walked hand in hand to the rise overlooking their ranch now, truly and legally theirs. "No regrets?" he asked, pulling her close. "Not one." She looked up at the man who'd become everything: protector, partner, husband, friend. "I came west looking for one life and found another entirely the right one." "The right one," he agreed, and kissed her as the first stars appeared. Behind them, music and laughter drifted from the meadow. Before them, their land stretched out full of promise, and between them was something stronger than paper or law, a bond forged in trust, tested by fire, and sealed with hope. They were home. The autumn air held a crisp promise as Rosalind planted the last of the apple saplings, patting the earth around its slender trunk with satisfaction. 6 weeks had passed since their wedding. 6 weeks of building their life together in ways both large and small. "That's the last of them," Colt said, wiping his brow as he surveyed their work. 20 young trees stood in neat rows, their potential reaching toward the cloudless sky. "Give them a few years, and we'll have a proper orchard." "A few years," Rosalind repeated, savoring the permanence of those words. "I like the sound of that." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "Getting ambitious, Mrs. Mercer." "Maybe a little." She leaned into his warmth. "I've been thinking about what else we could do. Maybe expand the vegetable garden, add a root cellar. Martha Henderson mentioned they need a school teacher in town." "You want to teach?" "I'd like to try." Put that finishing school education to use? She turned in his arms. What do you think? I think you'd be wonderful at it. His smile was soft, proud. I also think we should finish rebuilding the fence before we take on the whole world. She laughed, but he was right. There was still so much work to do. The ranch was thriving under their joint care, but every improvement revealed 2 more needs. Still, she'd never been happier. Each morning brought purpose, each evening brought peace, and the nights... You're blushing, Colt observed, amused. Just thinking. Dangerous habit. But he kissed her anyway. There among their infant orchard with the sun warming their faces, they were interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Colt tensed automatically. Old habits died hard but relaxed when Sam Henderson came into view, accompanied by Jim Jameson himself. Morning, Mercers, Sam called cheerfully. Look who finally made it out from Cheyenne. Jim Jameson was a tall, spare man with keen eyes that missed nothing. He dismounted with the ease of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle, surveying the improvements with obvious approval. Place looks good, he said simply. Better than it has in years. We've been working hard, Colt acknowledged. I can see that. Jameson's gaze swept over the new fencing, the repaired barn, the thriving garden. Makes me confident I made the right decision selling to you. About that, Colt began, but Jameson waved him off. Not here about money. Son, you've been making the payments regular. That's all I need. Actually came with a proposition. Rosalind and Colt exchanged glances. In their experience, propositions could go either way. I'm expanding the box, Jay. Jameson continued. Bought out the Thornton place, seems he hit hard times in Denver. Had to liquidate. Means I need reliable people to help manage the northern sections. Interested in running cattle on shares. You'd keep your own land, but manage part of my herd too. 50-50 split on the profits. That's generous, Colt said carefully. That's business. I need someone I can trust up here. Someone who knows the land and won't run at the first sign of trouble. His smile was dry. You've proven you're both. They discussed details while Rosalind made coffee, her mind racing with possibilities. More cattle meant more income, faster improvements to their own place. Security for the future they were building? I'll want an answer by week's end, Jameson said as he prepared to leave. No pressure, but I'd like to get things arranged before winter sets in proper. After the men left, Colt and Rosalind walked their land, discussing the offer. The afternoon sun slanted golden across the grassland, highlighting the improvements they'd already made and the potential still waiting. It's a good opportunity, Colt said finally. But it's more work, more responsibility. You sure you want to take on teaching and help manage a larger operation? I married you, didn't I? She teased. I think I've proven I can handle challenges. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant strokes, Rosalind noticed Colt seemed restless. He'd check his pocket watch, scan the horizon, then try to appear casual. Expecting someone. Maybe, at her raised eyebrow. He smiled. All right, yes, but it's a surprise. The surprise arrived just as the first stars appeared, a wagon driven by Tom Morrison from the general store, loaded with something large covered by canvas. Special delivery, Tom announced, clearly enjoying the mystery. All the way from Denver. They unloaded the cargo carefully, and when the canvas came off, Rosalind gasped. It was a piano, not grand or new, showing signs of wear around the edges, but a real piano nonetheless. Colt, where did you... Jameson mentioned it was being sold from the Thornton estate. Seemed fitting, somehow, you bringing beauty from his betrayal. He ran a hand along the polished wood. I know it's not what you were used to in Philadelphia, but... She silenced him with a kiss. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. Tom helped them position it in the cabin's main room, where it fit as if it had always belonged. After he left with thanks and payment, Rosalind sat at the bench, running her fingers over keys that were surprisingly well tuned. "Play something," Colt requested, settling in his chair to watch. Her fingers found the opening notes of Beautiful Dreamer, and music filled their home for the first time. As she played, she thought about the journey that had brought her here from concert halls in Philadelphia to this simple cabin where music meant more because it had been missing. When she finished, Colt was beside her on the bench. "Teach me." "You want to learn piano?" "I want to learn everything you're willing to teach me." So she showed him how to position his hands, how to find middle C, how to coax melody from the keys. His fingers were clumsy at first, more used to rope and reins than delicate movements. But he persevered with the same determination he brought to everything. "You're a patient teacher," he said after managing a simple scale. "I have a motivated student." She rested her head on his shoulder. "Colt, I'm glad William Thornton abandoned me." "That's a strange thing to be glad about." "Is it? If he'd kept his word, I'd be on some other ranch right now, married to a man I didn't know, living a life I hadn't chosen. I'd never have met you, never have discovered how strong I could be, never have found home." He turned to face her fully. "You really see this as home, not just making the best of circumstances?" "This is the first real home I've ever had," she said simply, "not because of the land or the house, but because it's ours, because we chose it and each other." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, there on their piano bench with stars visible through the window and their future stretching ahead like an open road. The next morning brought the first hard frost, silver crystals decorating every surface. Winter was coming, but they were ready. The root cellar was stocked. Wood was split and stacked. The animals were sheltered. They'd weathered drought and storms, threats and violence. Winter seemed almost peaceful by comparison. As Rosalind prepared breakfast, she watched Colt through the window, breaking ice on the water troughs with the easy efficiency of someone who belonged to this land. He glanced toward the house and smiled when he saw her watching, raising his hand in a small wave. Such a simple gesture, but it filled her with warmth. This was what she'd traveled west to find, though she hadn't known it at the time. Not the promise of an easy life or comfortable marriage, but partnership with someone who saw her truly and loved her anyway. "Deep thoughts?" Colt asked, coming in with a blast of cold air. "Grateful thoughts." She handed him coffee, hot and strong. "For frost and hard work, and especially for stubborn cowboys who take in stranded women." "Just the one cowboy, I hope." "Just the one," she confirmed, laughing. Later that day, Sheriff Morrison stopped by with the news. Ezekiel Thorne's business empire had indeed collapsed, his assets seized by creditors. He'd disappeared somewhere back east, unlikely to return. "One less worry," the sheriff said, accepting coffee gratefully. "Folks can breathe easier now." "We all can." Rosalind agreed. Though she and Colt exchanged glances, they'd learned not to take peace for granted, to appreciate it while it lasted but stay prepared for whatever came next. As the sheriff left, he paused at the door. "Almost forgot. There's talk of bringing the railroad through Cedar Ridge. Year or two out, but it'll change things if it happens." After he'd gone, Colt and Rosalind stood together looking out at their land. Change would come, it always did. The railroad would bring new people, new challenges, new opportunities. But whatever came, they'd meet it together. "No regrets?" Colt asked, echoing his question from their wedding day. "Not one," she replied, as she had then, but now she added, "only anticipation, for whatever comes next." That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the land, Rosalind played piano while Colt attempted to accompany her on harmonica. They weren't quite in tune, not yet, but they were learning. Like everything else in their life together, it would take time and patience and practice. But they had time now. They had patience earned through trial, And they had each other, which made all the practice worthwhile. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with the winter's promise. Inside, music and laughter filled the spaces that had once held only loneliness. The drifter had found his reason to stay. The abandoned bride had found her true home. And together, they'd built something neither had dared dream of, a love strong enough to weather any storm, roots deep enough to hold against any wind. As the last notes faded and they prepared for bed in the home they'd made together, Rosalind thought about the letter she'd write tomorrow to her father's old friends in Philadelphia, telling them of her new life. How could she explain the magic of hard work shared, of quiet evenings and dawn promises, of finding everything by losing what she'd thought she wanted? She couldn't, not really. Some things had to be lived to be understood. "Coming to bed," Colt called softly. "Coming," she answered, taking one last look around their home at the piano that brought music, the table where they shared meals, the fire that kept them warm, the door that had welcomed her in when she had nowhere else to go. Tomorrow would bring its own work and worries. They'd accept Jameson's offer. She'd apply for the teaching position. They'd continue building their life board by board, season by season. But tonight, she was simply grateful for second chances, for unexpected blessings, for the way love could grow in the most unlikely soil. The drifter had indeed claimed his bride, and she had claimed him in return, not with ownership but with understanding, not with possession but with partnership. And in that claiming, both had found freedom. As Rosalind blew out the lamp and joined her husband, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. The sound no longer frightened her. It was simply part of the symphony of their life, wild and beautiful, and absolutely, perfectly home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of Colt and Rosalind finding love and building a life together in the Wyoming Territory. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what touched your heart in this tale. If you enjoyed this Wild West romance, please subscribe to Wild West Night channel. Give this video a like. And don't forget to hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage, love, and the American frontier. Until next time, partners.